Loom was released by LucasArts back in 1990, the same year as The Secret of Monkey Island. In fact, a lot of you may be only aware of its existence because a character from the game was placed in The Secret of Monkey Island as a blatant advertisement. But what is Loom really about? Well, here's my review of it. The story of Loom is set in a fantasy kingdom where different guilds hold special powers. You're Bobbin Threadbare, a weaver who always wears a hood over his head and is terrible at making spells. Then one day, all the other weavers turn into swans and fly away, leaving Bobbin confused and trying to find his way.
Your name will be cursed forever, son of Signa, Loom child!
Bobbin stumbles around the different kingdoms, discovers that an evil bishop has some nefarious plot brewing, and gets caught in the story of his world reaching a terrible cataclysm. Loom is a game where the story is really hard to do justice in simple description. It's a game that you definitely have to play for yourself to really get. Even though it's a LucasArts adventure game, it breaks a lot of the conventions of the genre, and is quite unique. Instead of the traditional verb bar, you interact with objects by clicking them and then their icon in the bottom half of the screen. Beyond that, the only thing you can do is cast spells, which you do by playing musical notes. The notes can be played forwards and backwards depending on your needs and have different effects that way. This makes Loom quite unique as an adventure game, but it's also one that you do have to play with a pen and paper at the ready to write down the different spells you use. As you advance the plot, Bobbin learns new notes which are necessary for using some of the more complex spells.
Put it back the way you found it, now!
What's cool is that you can play the notes with the keyboard and so don't have to meticulously click every single one on the screen. Although the puzzle mechanic is quite unusual, it also means you don't have complex conversations or even carry inventory items with you like in other LucasArts adventure games. That admittedly makes this game rather simple and easy. In fact, the whole game unravels not unlike a movie, and while the story is well written and the characters you meet are interesting, the game will begin to feel almost a little too linear for an adventure game. And that's what Loom tends to be criticized for being too easy. It even comes with 3 difficulty settings for using the spells, and in the easiest mode you don't even have to write down the spells. Also, the spells are randomized each time you play, so you can't simply recycle the notes from a previous game, which at least that's something you have to physically do in the game each time you start a new game. The graphics are really nice and even a lot more varied than even in The Secret of Monkey Island. Granted, this is probably since you only visit most of the locations once throughout the whole game, but I find the graphic variety very welcome, especially in a fantasy game. There are lots of really funny scenes and moments in the game. My favorite has to be when Bobbin gets captured by the dragon.
Well, what have we here? Oh, that's what comes of being in such a blazing hurry, I guess. I thought you looked a bit scrawny. Oh, why, you'd hardly make a decent kindling.
Her voice is just priceless to begin with, and in order to defeat her, you must turn all her gold into hay and set it on fire, thus starting a grudge which carries over to the latter part of the game. Oh yeah, and that guy from the Scum Bar who was plugging Doom in The Secret of Monkey Island, he's Cobb, and you meet him fairly late in the game, which is when you discover what happens to people who look underneath a weaver's hood. If I have one genuine complaint about the game, it's the music, or rather the lack thereof for much of the game. I've often found it very annoying how in a lot of older adventure games, there's rarely background music to fit the setting. Even in a game like The Secret of Monkey Island, which has a brilliant score, there are many locations in the game which are just silence. However, in Loom's case, it's understandable since the music would have overlapped with the spellcasting sounds. Also, this game was made before the iMuse sound system was introduced. Still, it would have been nice if there had been a little more music outside of cutscenes. When there is music, fans of classical compositions can feast their ears on some classic Tchaikovsky. The voice acting which was introduced in later versions of the game is pretty good and feels genuine. However, the dialogue is pretty straight-faced. Bobbin's voice isn't very appealing for me, but you'll get used to it as the game goes on.
Grass green. I hate that colour.
But one thing I never got used to was his blood-curdling scream.
Ah!
Loom is a nifty and a really inventive title which has a lot of characters and a novel gameplay mechanic. It's admittedly very short, with the story being left on something of a cliffhanger, but the story is still very rewarding to play through regardless. Brad Moriarty never had a chance to fully complete the story for the game, instead focusing his efforts on other titles like The Dig. However, I definitely recommend this to classic adventure game fans for its easiness and novel elements.